They were legends, brilliant black stars who lit up the entertainment world. But with fame came immense pressure, drawing them into a relentless cycle of temptation and struggle. Their sudden and heartbreaking deaths didn't just steal away irreplaceable talent, they left a deep, aching void in the hearts of millions. In today's video, we take a powerful journey through the lives and untimely losses of 21 black celebrities, whose bright lights were tragically dimmed by drug overdoses. These icons once soared during their golden years, captivating the world with their gifts, but their stories ended in heartbreak, leaving behind painful memories and haunting questions. Join us as we uncover the truth behind the fame, the pain, and the devastating toll that claimed these unforgettable lives. Prince. Prince, the agonizing death in the elevator. Prince wasn't just a musician, he was a blazing force of nature. With Purple Rain, he didn't just capture the world's attention, he set it on fire. A once-in-a-generation talent, a symbol of pride for the African-American community, he transcended music to become a timeless icon. But behind the dazzling spotlight and legendary performances was a man fighting battles the world never saw. On the morning of April 21, 2016, the doors of the elevator at Paisley Park slid open, and everything changed. There, lying still on the cold, unforgiving floor, was the Prince of Funk. His skin was pale, his hand clenched tightly against his chest, as if he'd just endured unbearable pain. The silence in that tiny, confined space was deafening, suffocating. And in that moment, the world lost one of its brightest stars. No one saw it happen. No one knows exactly what he felt in those final seconds. But the scene left behind, scattered pill bottles, subtle yet haunting clues, painted a devastating picture. The tragedy hadn't started that morning. It had been quietly unfolding for years. Decades of electrifying performances, leaping, spinning, strutting in high heels, had ravaged his body. His knees, his hips, his very bones screamed in agony. Doctors recommended hip replacement surgery, but Prince, a devoted Jehovah's Witness, refused. It would have required a blood transfusion. Instead, he leaned on painkillers just to keep moving, just to keep performing, just to keep being Prince. That morning, like so many before, he felt the familiar surge of pain. He took the medication he always carried. But this time, something was different. His breathing grew shallow. His body began to fail him. And somewhere in the quiet of Paisley Park, his strength slipped away. Alone. When they found him, it was too late. Shock. Grief. Disbelief. The legend was gone. It wasn't until the toxicology report came back that the chilling truth surfaced. The pill that killed him was laced with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 100 times more potent than morphine. A counterfeit. A silent killer. No one knows if Prince even realized he had taken a deadly dose. But the outcome was tragically clear. He had unknowingly consumed a death sentence. The world mourned, not just for the artist lost, but for the man who had once ruled the world with sound soul and staggering brilliance. His death wasn't just an ending, it was the collapse of a vibrant, burning spirit. Now, all that remains is the echo of his genius, and a haunting silence where the music used to be. David Ruffin. David Ruffin, a lost legend and a lonely death in a hospital lobby. David Ruffin was the heart and soul of the Temptations, the unmistakable voice that turned My Girl into a timeless Motown anthem. His vocals were warm, powerful, and raw, laced with just enough rasp to make every word feel like it came straight from the soul. He wasn't just born to sing, he was born to shine. But sometimes, the same spotlight that lights up a star can also burn it out. After leaving the Temptations in 1968, Ruffin's solo career never reached the heights many had hoped for. Disappointed and adrift, he turned to cocaine, chasing a high that would haunt him for over 2 decades. But drugs don't heal, they only delay the pain. And for David Ruffin, each hit brought him one step closer to an ending no one wanted to imagine. On the night of May 31, 1991, after a small performance, Ruffin and a few acquaintances ended up in a rundown apartment, a place well known for drugs. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, beer bottles cluttered the floor, and in the middle of that haze, Ruffin leaned in for a deep hit of cocaine. Moments later, his heart raced out of rhythm, his breath grew shallow, his body trembled violently. Sweat poured down his face. His eyes filled with fear. He was overdosing, the golden voice of Motown, silenced in the very moment he needed it most. Panic swept the room. Those with him scrambled, unsure what to do. In a rush, they carried him to a car and sped toward the hospital. But when they arrived, they didn't wait. They didn't call for help. They simply dropped him in the emergency lobby and vanished into the night, leaving behind not just a man, but a legend, alone and fighting for his life. By the time hospital staff discovered him, it was too late. David Ruffin was gone. His death wasn't just a tragedy because of the overdose, it was heartbreaking because of the way it happened. The man who once sang so beautifully about love and devotion was left to die in silence, abandoned in a place meant for healing. David Ruffin, the voice that once moved millions, passed away not surrounded by music or fans, but in a cold, empty lobby, forgotten in his final moments.
Phyllis Hyman.
Phyllis Hyman, the silent pain and a lonely farewell. Phyllis Hyman was more than a soul and R&B diva, she was a timeless icon. Her voice wasn't just heard, it was felt. It echoed through grand concert halls and into the hearts of millions, carrying the weight of every emotion she poured into her songs. But behind the glamour, behind the show-stopping performances, was a woman quietly drowning in loneliness, a silent pain she carried for far too long. On June 30, 1995, just hours before she was set to grace the stage once again, the spotlight dimmed for the last time. Phyllis was found in her apartment, lying peacefully in a room adorned with soft silk drapes. Beside her, an empty wine bottle and a partially used container of medication told a story no one was ready to hear. The news of her passing shocked the world. Just that same day, she had been seen laughing with friends, her smile as radiant as ever. There were no visible cracks, no warning signs. To those around her, she seemed full of life. But behind that gentle smile was a decision she had quietly made, one no one could have predicted. Earlier that day, alone in her elegant room and getting ready for the evening's performance, she received a phone call. Hope flickered in her eyes as she picked up, perhaps expecting to hear from someone she still held close to her heart. But what followed was a cold finality. "Phyllis," the voice said softly, "it's really over between us. This will be the last time I call you. Please don't reach out to me again." The line went dead. And with it, something inside Phyllis seemed to fade too. That call stole the last bit of strength she had been clinging to. Though she had once lit up stages with her presence, deep inside, she often felt alone, even when the lights were brightest. That evening, instead of rehearsing, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat quietly, lost in reflection. Her life had been a storm of highs and heartbreaking lows, triumphs shadowed by quiet suffering. Days later, when friends came to check on her, they discovered a handwritten letter resting by her side. In it, Phyllis laid bare the depths of her sorrow, years of silent battles, heartbreak, and the isolation fame could never cure. Her passing left an irreplaceable void in the world of music. The voice that once soared with such soul and power was suddenly silenced, lost not to time, but to a sorrow too heavy to carry. Phyllis Hyman didn't just leave behind songs, she left behind a haunting reminder of how even the brightest stars can burn out when their pain goes unheard.
Rick James.
Rick James, the king of funk and his final tragedy. Rick James wasn't just a musician, he was a cultural force.
The embodiment of funk.
The genius behind era-defining anthems like Super Freak and Give It To Me Baby. His life sparkled with glitz, energy, and unfiltered musical brilliance. But beneath the bright lights was a darker, more complicated truth, one marked by scandal, self-destruction, and a constant dance with the edge. On the night of August 5, 2004, after long hours in the studio working on a new music project, Rick James returned to his room to rest. By then, certain habits had become routine. Habits rooted in his early years navigating the brutal highs and lows of the music industry. He turned to substances to stay awake, to dull the chronic pain that had followed him like a shadow. At one point in his prime, Rick reportedly burned through a staggering amount of money in a single week, fueling a lifestyle that thrived in the shadows behind the stage lights. It was the unseen cost of fame, the part no one clapped for. And while he gave the world unforgettable music, his body quietly bore the scars of a life lived on full blast. For years, Rick leaned on painkillers to manage the lingering damage left behind by decades of intensity. Though his health was slipping, the cycle of old habits was hard to break. They stayed with him, woven into the rhythm of his everyday life. Then came that final night. Rick James took more than his body could handle. And sometime in those quiet hours, in a room that had always been his sanctuary, he collapsed. Maybe in those last moments, he fought to hold on. Maybe he didn't even see it coming. But by the time his assistant found him the next morning, the vibrant space had turned hauntingly still. The shock deepened when the coroner's report was released. 9 different substances were found in his system. The combination overwhelmed his body. His passionate, driven heart simply couldn't take any more. Rick James left this world just when funk seemed to need him most. His voice silenced, his energy gone, his fire extinguished in an instant. But though he never finished his final melody, his legacy didn't fade with him. It lives on, etched into every bassline, every groove, every beat that still dares the world to get up and dance.
Shock G.
Shock G, a tragic farewell in a hotel room. Gregory Edward Jacobs, better known to the world as Shock G, was more than just a rapper.
He was a visionary.
The creative genius behind Digital Underground, the man who introduced us to the Humpty Dance, and the force who dared to infuse hip-hop with funk, humor, and experimental soul. But as the golden age of old-school rap began to fade, so too did the spotlight that once shone brightly on Shock G. Left to wander in the shadows of his past success, he battled with loneliness, addiction, and the personal demons that had haunted him for years. On the night of April 21, 2021, in a quiet hotel room in Tampa, Florida, Shock G found himself slipping into old habits once again, perhaps chasing a moment of peace, or simply numbing a pain he knew too well. He mixed alcohol with other substances, a combination his body, worn down by time, could no longer withstand. What followed happened quickly. His heartbeat became irregular, his breathing shallow.
And then, silence.
He collapsed, drifting into unconsciousness. When hotel staff found him the next morning, still unresponsive and far too quiet, the news sent ripples of sorrow through the hip-hop world. The final medical report would confirm what many feared: a deadly mix of substances had overwhelmed his body, leading to respiratory failure. And just like that, the music paused.
Forever.
Shock G left behind more than unfinished songs and fading memories. He left a legacy, bold, brilliant, and utterly unique. His influence shaped a generation of artists, and his creativity broke boundaries that still inspire musicians today. Though his voice has been silenced, fans around the globe still hear him. In the beats, in the bars, in the spirit of rebellion and innovation he championed. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, far beyond addiction and pain, Shock G is still writing rhymes. In a place where the music never stops.
Frankie Lymon.
Frankie Lymon, the teen idol and his final, tragic moments. Frankie Lymon was more than just a star. He was a musical prodigy, a phenomenon who lit up the stage in the 1950s. At only 13 years old, he stole America's heart with his angelic voice and the timeless hit Why Do Fools Fall in Love. Overnight, Frankie became the face of a generation. But behind the spotlight, a darker story was unfolding, one all too familiar in the world of child stardom. As Frankie grew older, his voice deepened, and the magic that had once set him apart began to fade. Fame, once a dream, became a weight he couldn't carry. The pressure to stay relevant and the pain of losing the spotlight drove him into the grip of heroin. A deadly escape he tried again and again to outrun, but never fully could. On the night of February 26, 1968, Frankie returned to his grandmother's home in Harlem, the place where it all began. It was more than just a house, it was a sanctuary filled with echoes of his childhood and memories of better days. At just 25 years old, Frankie was standing at the edge of a comeback. A new record deal was waiting. Hope was in the air.
The future, for once, seemed bright.
But instead of seizing that second chance, Frankie slipped back into familiar darkness. Maybe he believed he still had control. Maybe he thought he could handle it. But the years had taken their toll, and his body could no longer keep up with the choices his heart refused to let go of. By morning, the silence in the house was heavy. Frankie was found unresponsive on the floor, gone. Just like that. The boy who once made the world dance with joy had taken his final bow. His death stunned a generation. One day, he was filled with hope, ready to rewrite his story. The next, he was a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly dreams can die in the unforgiving glare of fame. Frankie Lymon died at 25, right when he was on the brink of something new, something redemptive. For fans of the 1950s and 60s, his loss cut deep.
He should have soared higher.
He should have lasted longer. But in Hollywood, talent isn't always enough. And sometimes, the greatest voices are the ones that fade too soon.
Donny Hathaway.
Donny Hathaway, a soulful genius torn apart by paranoia. Donny Hathaway was more than just a voice, he was a force. A soul icon of the 1970s, his rich, velvet tone brought timeless classics like A Song for You and Where Is the Love to life. At his peak, he was hailed as one of the most breathtaking voices of his generation. But behind the music, behind the brilliance, Donny was fighting a silent, relentless war, one waged within his own mind. For years, Hathaway battled with schizophrenia. The paranoia was suffocating. He was convinced that dark forces were manipulating his thoughts, watching his every move. No matter where he went, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was trapped in a terrifying reality only he could see. On the night of January 13, 1979, Donny checked into the Essex House Hotel in New York City. He was working with Roberta Flack on what was supposed to be a triumphant comeback, a project that could have redefined his career. But instead of a new beginning, that night became the end of his journey. Alone in his hotel room, the hallucinations returned with brutal force. Though he had been taking medication, it brought little peace. often clouding his mind even more. Overwhelmed and exhausted, Donny reached his breaking point. And sometime during that long, lonely night, he made a devastating decision. The next morning, hotel staff made a heartbreaking discovery just outside the building. News of his death sent a shockwave through the music world. One of the greatest voices of a generation had been silenced, not by age, not by fading fame, but by a battle with mental illness that too often goes unseen. Donny Hathaway was only 33 years old. His life was cut short. His story unfinished. Instead of taking the stage for an encore, he took his final bow on a cold New York sidewalk. What remains is his hauntingly beautiful legacy. A voice that still echoes through time, and a soul that reminds us how even the brightest stars can be consumed by the darkness within.
Ike Turner. Ike Turner, a foreseen, lonely death.
Ike Turner was more than a rock and roll pioneer. He was one of its founding architects. With the release of Rocket 88, one of the earliest records to define the genre, he helped lay the groundwork for a musical revolution. But despite his brilliance, Ike's legacy became shrouded in controversy, personal demons, and a life lived on the edge. In the final days of his life, something within him stirred. He confided in his assistant that he felt an eerie sense of doom, as if something dark was drawing near. On the morning of December 12, 2007, at his private home in San Marcos, California, those feelings proved prophetic. That day, his assistant entered the living room to go over his schedule. At first glance, he looked peaceful, sitting in his usual spot on the sofa, one hand resting on his lap, as if simply napping.
But something felt off.
As she approached, the truth set in. Ike Turner had slipped away quietly alone. Later reports confirmed that his death was linked to the long-term effects of substance abuse. And just like that, a complex, stormy chapter in music history came to a close. Ike's life was full of contradictions, genius and chaos, success and scandal, rhythm and rupture. But no matter the darkness that followed him, his influence on rock and soul remains undeniable. In the same house where he experienced both his triumphs and isolation, Ike Turner took his final bow, in haunting silence. A lonely end to a life that once roared with sound and fire. Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix, the fatal night of passion. Jimi Hendrix wasn't just a guitarist, he was a revolution. A firestorm of sound and soul, he redefined rock with electrifying hits like Purple Haze and Voodoo Child, leaving audiences breathless with every performance. But behind the dazzling lights and iconic riffs, his real life was far more fragile than the legend he built on stage. On the night of September 18, 1970, the world's greatest guitar virtuoso was found unconscious in his room at the Samarkand Hotel in London. Just hours earlier, he had spent a quiet evening with his girlfriend, Monica Danman, talking, drinking, and listening to music. It was a rare moment of calm in the whirlwind of his fame. But the next morning, Monica awoke to find Jimi unresponsive, struggling to breathe. She called for help immediately, but by the time he reached St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, it was too late. Jimi Hendrix had passed away. The official cause, respiratory failure due to a deadly combination of sleeping pills and alcohol. He was just 27 years old. The news sent shockwaves through the music world. One of the brightest stars in rock had burned out far too soon. Though his life was tragically short, his legacy became eternal. Jimi Hendrix may be gone, but his spirit, his sound, and his soul still echo through every note he left behind. A legend immortalized, but a story heartbreakingly unfinished.
Gerald Levert.
Gerald Levert, the golden voice of R&B and a sudden goodbye. Gerald Levert was more than just a singer. He was a powerhouse of soul, a golden voice that defined R&B in the 90s. With unforgettable hits like Casanova and Baby Hold On To Me, he didn't just sing, he moved hearts and stirred souls. But behind the fame and the velvet melodies was a man quietly battling pain, and on November 10, 2006, the music world was shaken to its core. That morning, Gerald was found unresponsive in his bed at his home in Ohio. Just the night before, he had confided in his family that he was feeling chest pains and struggling to breathe. Still, he hadn't yet seen a doctor. By the time his loved ones checked on him the next day, it was too late. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but despite their efforts, Gerald was gone. The final medical report revealed a heartbreaking truth. He had died from respiratory failure caused by an accidental overdose of prescription pain medication. Drugs he had been taking to cope with chronic pain that had haunted him for years. His passing sent waves of grief through the music industry and left fans around the world in shock. Gerald wasn't just another R&B star. He was a voice that carried the weight of emotion, passion, and truth. His death marked the end of an era. At a time when he was still lighting up stages with his rich, soulful voice, Gerald Levert slipped away quietly, leaving behind not just music, but a lasting legacy, and a silence that still echoes in the hearts of those who loved him. Ol' Dirty Bastard. Ol' Dirty Bastard, a chaotic life and a tragic end. Ol' Dirty Bastard was the wild card of the Wu-Tang Clan. Raw, unpredictable, and unapologetically himself. Known for his unfiltered rhymes and outrageous lifestyle, he embodied chaos in its purest form. But behind the eccentric genius and rebellious persona was a man on a collision course with tragedy. On November 13, 2004, just 2 days shy of his 36th birthday, ODB suddenly collapsed in a New York recording studio. Witnesses said he looked drained, gasping for air, and mumbling incoherently before slipping into unconsciousness. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. Ol' Dirty Bastard was gone. The official cause of death, acute heart failure, brought on by a lethal mix of substances that had taken a heavy toll on his body. It was a heartbreaking end to a life lived on the edge. ODB's death sent shockwaves through the hip-hop world. He wasn't just a rapper, he was a force of nature, a symbol of raw creativity and defiant energy. His voice helped shape the sound of a generation, and his influence still echoes in the culture today. His life was a whirlwind of brilliance and self-destruction. His death, a sobering reminder of the demons that haunt the music industry. And though he's gone, the void he left in the Wu-Tang Clan, and in hip-hop itself, remains impossible to fill.
DMX.
DMX, a rap legend's final battle. DMX wasn't just a rapper, he was a force of nature. With raw intensity and a voice that could shake the soul, he carved his name into hip-hop history with anthems like Rough Riders Anthem and X Gon Give It To Ya. But behind the fame and the fire, Earl Simmons fought a silent war, a relentless struggle with addiction and inner demons that never truly let go. On April 9, 2021, that battle came to a heartbreaking turn. DMX collapsed at his home in New York after reportedly consuming a substance his body could no longer endure. When his family found him, he was unresponsive, his heart had stopped. Paramedics rushed him to White Plains Hospital, where doctors confirmed the unthinkable: he had suffered catastrophic brain damage due to lack of oxygen.
For a week, the world held its breath. Fans prayed. Family clung to hope.
But the legend remained in a coma, and on that same day, April 9th, DMX was gone. He was only 50. The news sent shockwaves through the music world. DMX wasn't just a performer, he was a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of pain, passion, and perseverance. His lyrics were more than words. They were cries from the soul, stories of survival that resonated across generations. His passing left an unfillable void. For those who loved him, knew him, or simply felt his music, it was a loss that cut deep. DMX was more than a rap icon, he was a warrior. And though he never got the comeback so many prayed for, his legacy lives on.
Raw. Real.
Unforgettable. Michael Kenneth Williams. The sudden death of Michael Kenneth Williams shook Hollywood to its core. Widely regarded as one of the most gifted actors of his generation, Williams was best known for his unforgettable portrayal of Omar Little in The Wire, a role that etched his name into television history. But behind the acclaim and the spotlight, he wrestled with personal demons that never truly let go. On September 6, 2021, that long and painful battle came to a quiet end. He was found in his Brooklyn apartment, the lights still on, the television softly playing one of his favorite shows. Yet the man who once lit up the screen was gone. There were no signs of struggle, only the haunting stillness of a life that had slipped away. Nearby lay subtle reminders of the internal war he had fought for years. The official cause: an accidental overdose. A tragic, all too common fate that underscored the silent suffering even the most resilient souls can endure. Michael K. Williams' passing was not just a loss for Hollywood, it was a wake-up call. He leaves behind a powerful legacy, built on performances that were raw, real, and unforgettable. His work touched millions, and his absence is deeply felt. But through his art, his voice continues to echo.
Pimp C.
Pimp C, the tragic fall of a Southern rap legend. Pimp C wasn't just a rapper, he was a Southern icon, a pioneer who blended raw hip-hop with the soul of blues, leaving an undeniable mark through his work with UGK. But behind the bold, larger-than-life persona was a man fighting silent battles. On December 4, 2007, the world lost that legend. Hotel staff in Los Angeles found him lying peacefully on his bed, as if he were simply asleep. But in truth, Pimp C had passed away hours earlier, his life quietly slipping away. The official cause of death: respiratory failure, tied to an overdose of codeine, a substance he'd reportedly struggled with for years. His existing sleep apnea only worsened his condition, making his body more vulnerable. This time, the struggle ended without a sound, unnoticed until it was far too late. Though those close to him had long feared this day, knowing the weight of his personal demons, his death at just 33 still sent shockwaves through the hip-hop world. Pimp C's voice may be gone, but his influence?
Untouchable.
His legacy lives on, raw and real, in the hearts of fans who will never forget the underground king.
Heavy D.
Heavy D, the sudden loss of a hip-hop pioneer. Heavy D was more than just a rapper. He was a trailblazer of 90s hip-hop, best known for infectious hits like Now That We Found Love. With his upbeat style and larger-than-life presence, he carved out a unique place in music history. But even a celebrated career couldn't protect him from the unpredictable nature of life. On November 8, 2011, after a long flight back to California from London, Heavy D returned home feeling short of breath and experiencing chest pain. He chalked it up to travel fatigue, thinking rest would ease the discomfort. But just hours later, as he stood at his front door, he suddenly lost his balance and collapsed, without warning, and without anyone nearby to catch him. Luckily, a neighbor witnessed the fall and quickly called for help. When paramedics arrived, Heavy D was still conscious, but his condition had already become critical. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but less than an hour later, doctors confirmed the unthinkable: Heavy D had passed away.
The cause?
A pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that had fatally blocked blood flow to his lungs. Medical reports suggested that an anti-inflammatory medication he'd been taking may have worsened the condition. His death at just 44 years old sent shockwaves through the hip-hop world. Heavy D's sudden passing was more than a personal loss. It was a wake-up call about the hidden health risks faced by artists in the industry. He left behind not just a catalog of feel-good music, but a lasting legacy, and a deep sense of sorrow among fans and fellow musicians who loved and respected him.
Charlie Parker.
Charlie Parker, the jazz legend and the tragedy of a genius. Charlie Parker, known to the world as Bird, was more than just a jazz musician. He was a visionary, a trailblazer who redefined the sound of music and laid the foundation for bebop. His saxophone didn't just play notes, it spoke truths, challenged norms, and inspired a revolution in jazz. But while his genius soared, his personal life was marked by pain, struggle, and ultimately, heartbreak. On March 12, 1955, Charlie Parker took his final breath on a sofa in the New York apartment of Baroness Panonica de Koenigswarter, his devoted friend and patron of many jazz greats. When help arrived, Parker was already in a deep coma. His body was so frail, so worn down, that the medical examiner mistakenly estimated his age to be over 50. In reality, Bird was only 34. The official cause of death was heart failure and pneumonia, crushing consequences of years battling addiction, illness, and the brutal toll of a turbulent lifestyle. In the days leading up to his death, he'd been coughing endlessly, barely able to stand. His body, like a worn-out instrument, could no longer keep up with the weight of his soul. To those who knew the battles he fought, Parker's death wasn't entirely a shock, but it was a devastating loss all the same. The world of jazz lost one of its brightest stars far too soon. He took with him songs still waiting to be born, solos that would never be heard. And yet what he left behind, a legacy of fearless creativity and unmatched brilliance, continues to move, inspire, and shape the sound of music to this very day.
Billie Holiday.
Billie Holiday, a jazz legend, a lonely goodbye. Billie Holiday wasn't just one of the greatest jazz vocalists of all time. She was a voice that bled pain, beauty, and truth. Her haunting rendition of Strange Fruit still echoes as a chilling protest against racism, a cry from the soul that refuses to be silenced. But behind the unforgettable music was a life marked by deep sorrow and relentless hardship. On July 17, 1959, Billie took her final breath in a New York hospital. She was just 44. Her body, frail and failing from liver disease, lay under the harsh glare of police surveillance. Days earlier, a small packet of narcotics had been found near her bedside. Instead of compassion, Billie was met with cold judgment, shackled to her hospital bed, denied the treatment she desperately needed. As her health slipped away, so did the hope of recovery.
Her breath grew shallow.
Her once brilliant eyes faded into a distant stare. She died alone, under guard, in a sterile room that showed little mercy to a woman who had given the world so much beauty. Yet even in death, Billie Holiday's voice lives on. Her music, soaked in the raw emotion of a life lived on the edge, continues to move hearts across generations. In every note, she tells a story of pain, resilience, and unbreakable spirit. A legacy that can never be silenced.
Little Willie John.
The tragic end of soul pioneer Little Willie John. Little Willie John was a trailblazing soul singer, best remembered for his electrifying hit Fever. But behind the spotlight and smooth vocals was a life that spiraled into tragedy. One that ended not on stage, but behind the cold walls of a prison cell. On May 26, 1968, at just 30 years old, Little Willie John died while serving time in a Washington state prison. The official cause of death was pneumonia, but questions have lingered ever since. Whispers and speculation surrounded his final days. Some say his health had sharply declined after years of battling personal demons and the harsh realities of prison life. Others even spoke of possible mistreatment, though no solid evidence ever surfaced. His sudden and mysterious death left more questions than answers. It was a quiet, almost forgotten end to a voice that once lit up the airwaves and stirred the souls of R&B and soul fans across the nation. Though his final years were marked by pain and isolation, his musical legacy refuses to fade. Little Willie John may have died behind bars, but his voice, raw, emotional, unforgettable, still lives on in the hearts of those who remember what he gave to music.
Ray Charles.
Ray Charles, a soul legend's battle with addiction. Ray Charles was more than just a music icon. He was the heart and soul of rhythm and blues. With a voice that could stir the deepest emotions, he gave the world unforgettable classics like Georgia on My Mind and Hit the Road Jack. But behind the genius was a man fighting a silent war. For years, addiction cast a long, dark shadow over his life. On June 10, 2004, in the quiet of his Beverly Hills home, Ray Charles took his final breath. He was 73. His passing marked the end of a remarkable journey, one defined by extraordinary talent, relentless resilience, and the high cost of personal struggle. Though he overcame his addiction in 1965, the damage had already been done. Years of substance abuse left him battling chronic liver disease, a slow and painful reminder of his past. In his final years, as his health declined, Ray faced his fate with the calm dignity of a man who had already braved life's fiercest storms. When he passed, the world mourned, not just the loss of a music legend, but the departure of a man who had risen from hardship to shape the sound of a generation. Ray Charles's story is one of triumph and tragedy, of a man who turned pain into poetry and struggle into song. Though the road he walked was far from easy, his legacy lives on, echoing through time in every soulful note he left behind. Would you like a shorter version for Socha?
Marvin Sease.
Marvin Sease, the controversial death of an R&B icon. Marvin Sease, often hailed as the king of dirty blues, was more than just an R&B singer. He was a force of nature. With a magnetic stage presence and a voice that could shake the walls, Marvin electrified audiences across the South with his raw, soulful sound. But even the most powerful voices eventually fall silent. On February 8, 2011, Marvin Sease passed away at his home in Vicksburg, Mississippi. He was battling a severe case of pneumonia, and in his final days, the decline in his health was painfully clear. The booming voice that once captivated thousands had grown faint. He was forced to cancel several performances, not because he wanted to, but because his body simply couldn't carry him to the stage anymore. According to family members, Marvin had been suffering from a relentless cough and increasing difficulty breathing. Tragically, he didn't receive the medical care he needed in time. The official cause of death was listed as complications from pneumonia, but whispers of something deeper have lingered. Some believe that the years of hardship, heartbreak, and personal battles, including past drug use, had taken a lasting toll on his health, leaving his immune system weakened and vulnerable. Though pneumonia may have been the final blow, many close to him suspect his struggles began long before. The pain he poured into his music wasn't just performance, it was personal. And in the end, that pain may have cost him more than anyone knew. His death left a gaping hole in the Southern R&B community. Marvin Sease was more than just a singer. He was a legend, known for his unapologetic style, his emotional honesty, and a voice that could make you feel every word. His passing marked the end of an era, but his music and the stories behind it live on.
Dinah Washington.
Dinah Washington, the queen of the blues, and a sudden heartbreaking farewell. Dinah Washington, the unrivaled queen of the blues, possessed one of the most powerful and unforgettable voices in jazz and blues history. Known for soul-stirring classics like What a Difference a Day Makes and Unforgettable, she captivated audiences around the world. But even royalty isn't shielded from tragedy. On December 14, 1963, Dinah was found unresponsive in her Detroit home by her husband. The bedroom was dimly lit, serene, frozen in a quiet moment. On the nightstand sat subtle traces of the night before, empty glasses, pill bottles, and silence. The evening prior, Dinah had mixed alcohol with a popular stimulant used at the time to stay slim and alert. Few realized just how deadly that combination could be, especially for a heart already burdened by years of emotional and physical strain. When her husband tried to wake her that morning, he was met not with her vibrant smile, but with devastating stillness. At just 39 years old, Dinah Washington was gone, her sudden death sending shockwaves through the music world. A voice that had once lit up the grandest stages now fell silent. Though many chapters of her life remain unwritten, Dinah's legacy is far from forgotten. Her rich, soulful voice continues to echo through time, touching hearts just as deeply as it did decades ago. She may have left this world far too soon, but her music remains timeless, powerful, and forever unforgettable. We've just looked back on the tragic end of one of music's brightest stars, one among many who soared high only to fall under the weight of fame. Each loss is more than a headline. It's a haunting reminder of the darker side of stardom, where pressure, loneliness, and temptation can quietly steal even the most extraordinary lives. Which story lingers in your mind the most? Which loss hit you the hardest? Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with us as we continue uncovering the hidden heartbreaks behind the fame, the untold stories of an industry that dazzles but often devastates.